Hey everybody, it's Allison. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be making some quick and easy fun fold cards. And this is an idea that I've had in my head for a couple of weeks now, and I finally decided to sit down yesterday and do it, and it was honestly a lot easier than I thought it would be and a little addicting. So the star of all of these cards is obviously the elf hat die. This is from the new release from Waffle. And I'm starting off with the top folding A2 card base. And I'm going to flip it over. So now it opens downwards instead of upwards. And this hat die is unique because it doesn't have a cutting edge at the bottom. And that is what allows for this fun fold technique. So think about other dies you might have in your stash that are like this. Now I'm going to line the die up on the card base, aligning those bottom edges of the die with the crease in the card base. So here you'll see that crease. And I'm going to go ahead and tape this die into place so it doesn't move. And I'm also going to make sure that the card base is open before running it through my die cutting machine because you don't want it to run through both sides. So here it is after I ran it through my Platinum 6. And now that piece at the top, you need to release it. So I am just snipping these two edges at the bottom, and that will reveal just the hat. Okay, so there it is. Now I'm just going to clean up the edges where the crease is with my scissors. Now you will see that this is the area of the card that I fuss around with the most because sometimes I am a stickler for details. Now this is paper from Doodlebug. I love this polka dot paper. I use it a lot. It's double-sided and you will see the other side in this card, which is fun. Now I'm scoring this to make a top folding A2 card. So this paper is 11 inches by 4 1/4 and I scored it at 5 1/2 inches to make that top folding A2. So now I'm just going to test how these two pieces will fit together. So that original card base with the elf hat goes inside and then the hat goes on top, and so that's how it's going to work. Now the reason that I created the whole card base out of this patterned paper is that I was trying to reduce the bulk of what would be behind the hat. This pattern paper is thinner than the typical cardstock that I use for card bases. You will see that I'll do things differently on the next card, and you'll see that in a bit. So here we go. The card is taking shape. Now, me being me, I totally forgot that I had wanted to add this quilting texture to the front panel. This Meandering Texture Die doesn't have a cutting edge around it. So I decided that I could still run it through my die cutting machine, even though the card was basically assembled at this point, because it's just on the front panel. And again, it doesn't have a cutting edge around the sides. So I'm going to run it through my die cutting machine, and the rest of the card is unaffected because the die is not on top of that. So we'll see how it came out. I was a little worried. Not worried, but I mean, I knew it was just going to cut this part, but I had already done all that work. But thankfully it worked. Now the texture is not as obvious with this polka dot pattern, but it is more obvious in person. Now clearly I changed my mind on the hat to use on this card, but now I'm also looking at these bottom edges again. And I'm going to just trim these to make them look a little bit cleaner. Like I said, this was the one area of this card that I was kind of fussing around with. And you'll see how I do things differently on the second card. You'll see that hat off to the right. I was definitely playing with a lot of pattern paper. These hats are so much fun. Now, like I said, I'm going to do things differently on the second card. And that's just part of the fun of these kinds of cards. You experiment and you figure out what you would do differently on the next one. All right, so here I'm just playing around with parts of the hat, and that's the little die that makes that part of the hat, the little ball. Now this is the overlapping vertical Mary word die. I have cut it out of 3 colors of cardstock, and you'll see how I assemble those in a bit. I used that die on the original elf hat that I made in my original video. Now I'm coming in with a new hat, and you'll see that I quilted it with that Meandering Texture Die, so it has that quilted look, which I think is cute. So just seeing if I like everything. So now it's time to glue this pink hat to the card base. So I'm just gonna flip things over to make it easy on myself and add that pink hat. So you saw that the beginning of this video where I created the top or the fun fold feature was just really quick and easy, and the rest of this is just gluing and deciding, you know, which of your 500 pieces of patterned paper you want to use on your hat. All right, so here's how I created this Mary die. I'm going to create this little faux drop shadow effect. So I'm going to glue the pink one to the blue and just make sure that there's blue peeking out of the bottom and side edges. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this white layer, putting it on top. Now I had mentioned that I used this die in the elf card that I made in my original video, which I'll link to at the end. And I made a different color for each of these letters. So this is just yet another way to use this die, which I love. And I think using this die on the card with the elf hat is so fun because, you know, it uses up that vertical space. All right, so here's this cute little ball. Looks like a little bell. And there is a second die in the set to create a different little ball. And you'll see that on the last card in my video. And you'll also see something else that we're going to do with that. All right, now here's the card in an envelope and comes out, and then you just pull that down, pull the hat down to reveal the inside of your card. And I think it's so fun and, you know, just such a surprise for the recipient. Now you'll see I added some enamel dots at the top around the word just to add a little detail. And before I make a second fun fold card, I'm going to make this card. And here I'm just obviously rating my paper stash. I probably have a million paper pads from My Favorite Things, which sadly you can't buy anymore. This paper, again, is thinner than typical cardstock, and I wanted that in order to minimize the bulk on the card. But this is just an example of how you can take patterned paper and add color. This paper started off as a very pale pink, and I'm just coming in here with this darker pink and adding color around the edges, which you know I love to do. Now, this, like I said, this card is not a fun fold card, but it does have a fun feature to it, which you'll see in a minute. All right, so here we are with more patterned paper. This Lawn Fawn paper is some of my favorite paper to use every year for the holidays. The Nitpicky Winter Pack, which I used for the hat that you see right here, is still available. This original Nitpicky is older, and I'm not sure that anyone sells it anymore, but they're very similar. I'm flipping through that older pack, hoping to find this one piece that I want, and I did luck out. Now, remember how I pointed out that this hat die doesn't have a cutting edge at the bottom? So to get that straight edge, just line it up at the bottom of your paper, and you'll have that straight edge when it cuts out. Now here we are with the fun feature. This is something I suggested in my first video for this collection. I will link to that video at the end of this one and in the description below. This long die is from the Felt Sunflower Bloom set from Spellbinders, and I've cut it from some green felt. You just fold it in half, and then you just start rolling it. It really is easy, a lot easier than it looks. I should note that when I normally stitch with felt, I use 100% wool felt. But I didn't have the right color, so this is felt that I found in an old stash of craft supplies in the basement, and it worked just fine. Now you'll see in a bit how I finish this up with some hot glue, but this is also why I wanted that dark green patterned paper. I'm also cutting the trim for the hat from the same felt. And now here's a set of Subsentiments from the new release. You know I love these because they're quick and easy to use, and I am lazy. Now I had originally planned on using these new ones, but I'm leaving this part in because I want to show you how I use these on my cards. When you pull them apart, there are still teeny little tabs where they were attached to the other sentiments. So I just take a scissors and line them up along that straight edge and snip. You really don't even need to do this because they're so tiny, but you know me. It's always about the little details with me. All right, so the next thing I always do is I come in with a black marker and run it along all four edges so that you don't see the white core along the sides. All right, so there's what I was originally going to use, but now I'm dipping into my stash. Obviously, I do love these things. Look how many sets I have. And I'm just going to search for some other Christmas sentiments in here. And I did run across this one. This is the Subsentiments Merry die cut. And you'll see the sentiments that I chose from this set. So here they are. And of course, I love putting sentiments on wonky like that. All right, let's finish up this little pom-pom that we're making. So you just put hot glue at the very end. And then once that's connected, you just kind of, I'm not floofing it or fluffing it, I'm kind of pressing it down to kind of flatten it. And then I'll put hot glue on the card itself, and there we go. Now, isn't that adorable? I did add a few enamel dots to the design just to round things out, but obviously the star of this card is that little pom-pom. All right, now it's time to make that second fun fold card. I'm starting off with a full sheet of cardstock that I cut in half lengthwise. And I'm just going to create two top folding card bases. I'm scoring both of these at 5.5 inches. And then I'll just reinforce those score lines with my bone folder. All right, now, so here are the two bases, and I'm going to flip one of them over, just like I did on the first card, and here just seeing how these are both going to fit together. So on that card base that I flipped over, I'm going to position that hat die at the bottom, just like I did on the first card. So everything is the same as the first card, but I created a second white card base instead of using that patterned paper. Now again, I'll make sure that I open up the card panel before running this through my die cutting machine. And again, just like the first card, I will snip those bottom edges to release the hat from all the rest of that paper. And I brought out my Tim Holtz Snips, which are great for snipping. All right, I'm coming in with that second card base, and I decided that I wanted to trim a little bit off to make the pieces fit together a little bit better. And, you know, that's just the nature of making cards like this. You find that you might need to make little tweaks. And now I'm going to glue the two together, gluing the elf hat piece on top of the back panel of the other piece. Now again, I'm finding an area that I want to trim just so that the fold is working smoothly. Now I'm gluing a piece of patterned paper to that front panel. Remember on the first card, I used patterned paper to create that entire card base. Now I did use thinner cardstock for these white card bases. I used 80-pound Neenah, where I normally would use 110-pound Neenah for my card bases. Again, I just wanted to minimize the bulk of this card. So here are those exposed edges at the bottom. Again, they were clearly bothering me on the first card, so this time I decided to just trim the sides off the entire card. I took it to my large paper trimmer, and now the width of the finished card is 4 inches instead of 4.25. And now you can see that the bottom of the hat covers the entire width of this card. Now here's another option for the ball of the hat. There's the die. So that, like I said, there's two little options for that ball in the set. Here's the Merry Christmas die. Again, this is part of the new collection. And this die set does come with a shadow layer. You'll see it right here. But similar to the first card, I'm going to create my own faux drop shadow. I felt like the shadow die was kind of creating a competing focal point for the card. So here we are with final assembly. We're just going to glue all the pieces on now, just like we did before. And, you know, hopefully you'll see that creating this card was super easy. And it all has to do with the fact that that hat die did not have a cutting edge at the bottom. All right, so I am creating this drop shadow effect. And when I'm working with little finicky dies like this, I kind of start with one side. So I started with that S and made sure that was lined up. And then I'll just, with my fingers, line everything up and make sure that you can see just a little bit of that green word behind the white. And here we are with the A2 size envelope and the fun fold feature. I did add a few white pearls to the card to dress it up a bit. And I think this card is so pretty with these colors. And, you know, here they are both together where you can see the difference in that bottom edge. I think they both look good, but when I make more, I'll probably trim off those edges again like I did with the card on the left. I think it looks cleaner, but it was also just made it a lot easier. Now that Meandering Texture die that I used for this card is not as obvious on camera, but when you open it, you can definitely feel that texture. And then you see the fun polka dots on the inside as well as on the back, which I think is really fun. All right, so here is that finished card. And these were all really fun to make. This elf hat die is just crazy easy to use to make fast cards and cute cards. Now here I wanted to show you a card that I started in my last video. I hadn't finished it. I just used the stencil. This is the Woodgrain stencil and texture die. And I have details on my previous blog for this card, which I will link to below. And that is it for me today. I appreciate you joining me. If you liked this video, please give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. I hope to be back sometime this week with another fun video. So I will see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.